The story begins in the aftermath of a brutal battle, with Rogue lying injured upon the earth. As he pushes himself up, a sharp, grinding agony flares through his chest. His ribs are broken. Around him, his companions lay wounded and scattered. The priest still stands, locked in a desperate struggle against the endless tide of undead, while the hero faced the Demon King himself. Suddenly, the air grows heavy with malevolence. The authority of the Demon King manifests and the very earth groans in protest. From the soil, countless skeletal hands clawed their way to the surface, and in an instant, a full army of the undead stands before them. Seeing the horde, Rogue makes his choice. His flesh melts away, revealing the skeleton beneath. "Priest!" he cries out to his companion, asking him to unleash his divine authority. Painful oblivion. The priest responds, and a wave of holy power washes over Rogue. Energized, the skeletal warrior charges forward, his blades cutting through the ranks of the undead. The battle rages anew, but a greater danger emerges as the Demon King strikes the hero from behind. But the attack is narrowly dodged. As the Demon King prepares a final deadly blow, the hero counterattacks with blinding speed, severing one of the tyrant's arms. He levels his sword, declaring, "This fight is over." A cruel smile is the Demon King's only reply. His severed arm regenerates in an instant, then lashes out, coiling around the hero with crushing force. The hero struggles, believing his enemy plans to self-destruct. But then Rogue leaps into the fray with a defiant smile. "If we are to die," he declares, "then we die together." His blade severs the demonic hand. With a final, resolute cry, Rogue unleashes his ultimate technique, Fulfillment of the Abyss. The resulting explosion of power stuns his allies, leaving a crater in its wake. As the dust settles, Rogue is seen barely standing. Relief washes over the hero, until he sees Rogue's own arm has been severed. And still, the Demon King lives. "All that for nothing," the Demon King taunts. "A worthless death." Enraged, Rogue delivers a kick to the fiend's face. In retaliation, the Demon King slams him violently to the ground, pinning him beneath a crushing hand. The priest steps forward, channeling the last of his divine strength into the hero. Empowered, wielding the holy sword and the authority of light, the hero charges, his final strike cleaving the Demon King in two. The demonic body crashes to the earth. "Is it over?" the priest asks, weary. The hero doesn't answer, instead calling the priest closer. As the priest rushes to his side, he sees a miracle. Rogue's body has begun to regenerate. But then, the Demon King's voice echoes once more. "I hope the blessing finds you well," he mocks, his form dissolving. "Do not fret. This was always our intended end." He explains that his physical form has served its purpose and is now collapsing. He declares their victory, even as his head separates and falls. Yet, in his final moment, he offers a warning. "Countless choices await you. Despair will follow. Even when crushed beneath the weight of responsibility, you must not stop. I pray your journey finds a different ending than ours, for we lived only in emptiness and folly." With that, his body dissolves into nothingness. The battle that determined the fate of the world was over. In the days that followed, the party disbanded. The wizard was captured by his old headmaster and sent back to his studies. The elf returned to her distant homeland. The priest withdrew once more from the secular world. The false light faded, and life continued under the sun as if the Great War had never been, and an age of peace endured. 150 years later, deep within a forest, a figure sits beneath a great tree. It is Rogue, his body now entirely skeletal, bearing the weight of centuries. The immortality forced upon him, the Demon King's so-called blessing, has become an eternal curse. He reflects on the passage of time. Mountains have crumbled, plains have turned to desert. The only constants are the stars above and himself. He wonders what meaning remains in an existence that cannot end, in a life of eternal solitude. Suddenly, a shooting star crosses the sky. In the silence that follows, a child wanders into the clearing and stumbles upon him. Startled, she bears witness to a truth hidden for 150 years. The time that had stopped for Rogue finally begins to flow again. Rogue is surprised. What brings a child here so late? The girl, instead of fleeing, runs forward and tugs at his bony cheek, bursting with excitement. A talking skeleton. Taken aback, Rogue gently takes her hand. "Stop that. I have seen lost children in these mountains before, but you are the first to pat me. Did no one teach you to run from things that are not human?" The child smiles. "I was taught not to judge by appearances." The answer surprises him. He had been lost in sentimentality, and then this strange child appeared. Hearing his troubled remark, the child asks, "Are you a master?" She notices his strange sword. "Are you a knight?" Rogue shows his blade. "I am an imperial messenger, a courier who travels the land with the emperor's word. I protect this mountain with a cursed sword, but I am no one's master." The child's eyes widen. "An imperial messenger? You must be very strong." Of course, it is not a task for just anyone. It requires knowledge of high-level magic. Like this. He uses his necromancy to pull a squealing forest spirit from the ground, amazing the child. She said that she wanted to become strong and begged him to take her as his disciple. Rogue laughed and refused, saying he had only been bored and that taking a disciple would be a bother. The child tapped his head, calling him stingy and heartless. But Rogue repeated that he was not a master. The next morning, when Rogue was resting, the girl arrived with a shout. Annoyed, he asked if she would not go home, but she declared that she would not leave until he taught her swordsmanship. He still urged her to go home because her parents would worry, and a skeleton could be mistaken for a child-kidnapping monster. Suddenly, the child's playfulness faded, as she revealed that her house had burned down and her parents had died, and that her mother had told her she had to become strong to survive alone. "That's why I have to become strong," she added with a brave smile. In her, Rogue saw a reflection of his own past, and with a tired sigh, he finally agreed to teach her. The child was overjoyed. Rogue raised a hand, remarking that it was unbecoming of a strong woman to keep refusing a child's request. The child gasped at the implication that he had once been a woman, but Rogue remained silent, annoyance flickering in his hollow eyes. She thanked him again and started playing overjoyed. As their training began, Rogue thought of the Empire's suffering. Teaching the child to stand on her own would be his atonement for failing his duties long ago. He taught her swordplay with a wooden sword. They rested beneath a tree. He summoned monsters for her to fight. They played together, frightened a traveler, and slept with the child's small hand resting on his skeletal one. 11 years later, the young woman bathed in a forest lake and Rogue called her to eat. As they cooked, she grew serious and told him she had something to discuss. Seeing her so serious, Rogue commented on her sudden solemnity. Over the meal, she explained that the village she had once lived in had been abandoned after a monster surge. The Empire had done nothing, and that hope had faded there. Rogue understood and told her she had become strong, then asked directly whether she planned to become a hero. The direct question unsettled her. Rogue noted that after teaching her for 11 years, he could see what she was thinking, recalling an old friend who had also wanted to be a hero to help people, and had insisted one needed no qualifications to save others. This left the woman surprised. As the sole successor of the northern hunting techniques, Rogue presented her with a dagger and instructed her to draw it only with good intentions, telling her to go save the world, and then return, promising he would be there waiting. Prepared to depart, the girl said goodbye. Rogue wondered how long it would take. 5 years? 10 maybe? But was confident she would return. After she left, a profound sadness settled over him. The connection had been brief, but waiting no longer felt as frightening as before. Suddenly, he was interrupted by a voice asking if he had gotten lost as well. Distracted, he replied that he was not a master, then turned to see the girl standing there, badly wounded but smiling. It had been a while. One of her legs was missing, yet she laughed and said the journey had been wonderful. The Empire was vast and she had helped people with the skills he had taught her. They called her a hero, but the Emperor had seen her as a thorn and ordered her assassination. Rogue suddenly hugged her, surprising her. She felt dizzy and clung tightly, whispering questions about his well-being and whether he had cried when she was gone. But Rogue could not speak before her final breath slipped away when the soldiers chasing after the hero arrived. Their leader, a knight, ordered silence when he spotted Rogue, commanding everyone to pack quickly and descend the mountain. Rogue's fury became palpable as he produced a gleaming sword and thundered at them, asking whether they still thought this was a mountain. He explained that 120 years ago, as an imperial messenger, he had found remnants of the Demon King's army here and had torn them apart until their corpses became soil and the forest grew. He had guarded it ever since, fearing necromancers would misuse it, but now guarding seemed no longer necessary. He summoned monsters that descended upon the soldiers and slaughtered them. The knight tried to rally his men, insisting that a single necromancer could only control so many and to wait it out. But countless more corpses rose and the knight stared in horror, asking what necromancy this was and who Rogue was. A monster severed the knight's head. Rogue proclaimed to the heavens that he was the mouth of the Emperor and the voice of the Empire, calling on the people of the Empire to heed the messenger's words. He slashed the ground and ripped the mountain open, declaring that if the Empire strayed from its founders, well then its nobles and loyal subjects had the right to set it back on course, and that his old homeland would pay for its crimes. His rage unleashed a demonic army that chased the soldiers into a nearby village. The soldiers believed they had found safety, but the army followed, slaughtering them within the village walls. Panic spread until a man stepped forward whose sword technique cleaved monsters apart with blinding speed. That man was Imperial Knight Escher Soma, and his eyes locked onto Rogue standing atop a giant monster. He scoffed that a mage who hid behind undead dared to face him on the front lines. Escher attacked and struck the monster's leg, and Rogue was startled to see a matching wound appear on his own leg. He remembered the same wound on his disciple and realization dawned. He whispered in pure hatred, asking whether it had been Escher. Consumed by wrath, Rogue turned his power on the village, intent on total destruction, and Escher rushed to stop him. Their swords clashed in a furious dance. Rogue gained the upper hand and overwhelmed Escher with relentless blows, forcing him back. Escher admitted it was the first time since facing the 4 knights that he had been pushed this far and demanded to know what Rogue was. Rogue answered with a single, chilling word. Avenger. Gravely wounded, Escher tried to stall by saying vengeance could not be known after so many kills. Rogue remained calm and explained that necromancy consumed immense stamina. The greater the distance and number, the higher the cost. He raised a hand and placed it on Escher's face, his grip crushing, and accused him of pride in killing that had destroyed the Empire's people. It had taken Rogue's disciple, the hero. Blood streamed from Escher as he struggled and finally slashed to break free. Rogue evaded and kicked him back against the stones. Escher laughed bitterly and called Rogue a monster who did nothing but whine, insisting that all those deaths were necessary for the Empire's cause. Rogue replied coldly that Escher's death at his hands was equally necessary. Escher smirked that not today. A sudden white light descended behind him, and similar lights struck around the village, locking Rogue's monsters within barrier prisons as commands rang out. Install mana relay devices, circuit stabilization confirmed, connect to 155 mana batteries, anti-undead barrier shield activated. The mission succeeded and the soldiers cheered as the undead army vanished. Escher grinned, seeing the undead army destroyed, and explained that the barrier generator had been crafted by the legendary wizard of the hero's party, the greatest in history 120 years ago, and that even Rogue would not last long within its reach. Rogue answered that he had already known that, calling the artisan spirit foolish but stubborn, dismissing the loss. He could just raise another army, he said, and those who would truly stand with him were not the undead but the Empire's exploited citizens. With them he would bring the Empire to its end. He reflected on the old days with his party, when they hated war but were forced to fight, days when death had been a certainty, and wondered whether so many lives had vanished for such a future. He had no answer. In his skeleton form he gazed into the distance, remembering his companions and questioning who he had fought for and where he was supposed to go in this era without them. With no answer, he simply kept walking forward. For days later, in the northern adventurers' village, Rogue entered a restaurant holding out a map and asked for directions because he had lost his way. A customer scoffed that this was an adventurer's guild, not a guide office, and remarked that for a wanderer Rogue reeked of blood, mentioning the grim rumor of a necromancer who had ravaged Chongtap village, a skeleton who commanded the dead, and then threw a knife. Rogue caught it with cold fury and warned to be careful whom one picked a fight with. He slammed his fist into the floor, cracking the boards and revealing a masked man below with the same knife in his chest. The customer, unfazed, ordered his men to attack. 2 attackers rushed forward, and Rogue, irritated, reminded them he had only asked for directions, and that what happened next was their fault. One attacker charged with a sword, only to be dodged, struck, and punched into the ground. The second slashed at him, but he caught the blade, grabbed his collar, and flipped him over. Rogue then turned toward the seated customer, but 2 more attackers rushed at him. He leapt between them, forcing their knives against each other, leaving them stunned. He then slammed both their heads with his bare hands before vanishing from sight and reappearing behind the seated customer. The man quickly drew his sword, but Rogue hurled him backward with enough force to shatter the floor. The remaining attackers stared in shock until a commanding voice stopped the fight, and a man approached to say that he would give Rogue what he wanted. The others whispered in surprise, seeing the guildmaster. He introduced himself as Thor Vinland and invited Rogue to his office. Thor began a story about a skeleton who haunted the mountains behind Chongtap village and admitted he had dismissed it as rumor until now. Rogue slammed his fist on the table and demanded not to waste his time, asking what Thor truly wanted. He lit a cigarette and spoke of how the guild had been neglected by the Empire, how villagers abandoned their homes while others took reckless requests to protect their land only to die in vain. Each day, those who remained trembled in fear, waiting slowly for death to come. Rogue mocked his words, asking why they had not resisted the Empire, saying that if nothing was done, nothing would change. Thor countered that they had not done nothing, they could do nothing. Law and order in the abandoned lands fell to those who remained, and adventurers gathered to protect their homes. Other guilds too fought desperately, pouring everything into defending their families, leaving them no better off. Rogue asked if they had never thought to form an alliance to fight the Empire. Thor replied that such a thing would not be simple, for it meant war, where countless people would die. Instead, they waited for someone to save them. That hope arrived in the form of the hero who lifted them from despair. They embraced that hope, but it failed. And Thor now realized what they truly lacked was hatred. He leaned forward, eyes burning, and said it didn't matter if their homes were destroyed. If they could kill the Empire, then dying would be worth it. Because that is war, and he asked Rogue to help them. Whether Avenger or Demon, it did not matter. The guild wanted to join Rogue's war. Rogue, unsettled, apologized for destroying his guild and admitted he had abandoned the Empire until the villages fell to ruin. He placed an item on the table, a Ruby-class adventurer tag, a rank extinct since the Great War, and explained it had been 150 years since he had last accepted a request. Thor stared in shock. Rogue told him not to mind it, calling himself a wraith of a filthy past, and accepted the request. His first destination would be the northern mountain range, the most dreadful on the continent where the snow never ceases to fall. In the northern mountains, Rogue traveled with two men from the guild, Muon and Sword Harrier. He asked how long it had been since they left the village, and one of them replied while peering through a magnifying glass that this was the 5th day of discreet movement along the mountain range. Rogue noted that they were quite fast for how they are moving and then pointed toward a group ahead and questioned who they were and how they had gotten in front. Muon explained they were survivors from Chongtap village joined by looters returning to the capital, and judging by their lack of gear they had been cut off. Rogue asked what lay on the lower path, and Aereo urged them to at least remember their names, explaining the lower road past small households that would be raided for supplies because plundering was common for Imperial Knights now. Rogue's tone was final. Then he must end them. Before his companions could react, he vanished and descended upon the looters like a storm, his attack causing instant chaos. Soldiers shouted about an ambush, and from above Muon remarked that the man was already dead. Below, Rogue fought fiercely, surrounded. A female soldier ordered her troops to block his retreat, but Rogue appeared behind her and decapitated her, mocking that their words were nothing but decoration as he held the head aloft. He summoned his monstrous army and overwhelmed the soldiers. His allies watched and realized the power he had shown at the guild was merely a fraction of his true strength. He was the wraith of Chongtap village. As the battle concluded, Rogue sat upon a monster horse, surrounded by corpses. A soldier attacked from behind. Rogue dodged, countered with a kick, and broke his mask. A pendant slipped from the soldier's neck, and the sight triggered a memory of long ago when a man had given Rogue the same pendant as an apology for doubting him, saying it was a charm made by his daughter who wished for an adventurer's safe return. Rogue had accepted it gladly, promising to thank her, but the man had then revealed his daughter had been killed by the Imperial Army 2 years prior. Everyone there carried wounds, the man had said, cursing the Empire and burning their remaining lives for revenge. Do not ruin your life with the same hatred, he had warned. Someone is always waiting for everyone in the world. The memory faded. Nearby, a monster struck down a soldier who gasped for forgiveness from his daughter, Michelle, as he fell. Rogue watched and then, in a flash of movement, avenged him by killing the monster. Muon and Aereo joined him and promised to handle the cleanup. They noted he was burning the bodies instead of raising them, and that his skeletal face seemed to carry a profound sorrow. From within him a dark voice emerged, the voice of his own torment, mocking that despair had only begun and that his choices would only drive him deeper, that he could not escape fate. Rogue commanded the voice to be silent and told the dead to remain in the underworld. But the voice only laughed and he was forced to listen, trapped in the curse of his own immortality as he marched toward a war he never wanted but could not avoid. The story then shifted to a burning mansion, where a figure sang, while gazing from a balcony. This person delighted in the screams of the people, noting the strength of their lungs and savoring the smell of burning. This was Lady Fry. A knight approached her, suggesting that the men wanted to play with the princess's head. But Lady Fry declined, saying she was too heartbroken. She admitted she had expected the kingdom to be large enough to make the battle worthwhile, but it had ended too blandly. She wondered if anyone in the Empire was crazy enough to fight her. The knight dismissed the idea, but before more could be said, a soldier arrived with a decree. He announced that a massive undead army had appeared at the northern wall. Led by a necromancer and by the Emperor's command, Lady Fry was to subjugate them. She burst into laughter, calling the necromancer a lunatic and delighting at the challenge. Declaring it's time for war, she ordered her troops to assemble and march forward. Rogue Muron and Harriet continued traveling together. After 2 weeks of silence, Muron began to feel restless. He shared his concerns with Harriet, saying that Rogue walked like a dead body and never spoke a single word. Muron even wondered how Rogue's head appeared to float in midair. This memory made Harriet recall a previous meeting with the guild leader. The guild leader had explained that the undead infesting Chongtap village were connected to a hero who had recently died. The village was where the hero spent her childhood. When the hero escaped from the knights and came to the village for shelter, the undead army suddenly appeared. Most importantly, Rogue's fighting style matched the hero's perfectly. Therefore, the truth became obvious. The hero they sought to save had perished from her injuries. The guild leader insisted that Rogue was not evil, only lost and in pain. Even if Rogue might not become their ally, he remained vital to stopping the empire. Since Muron and Harriet were northerners, the guild leader gave Harriet a map and asked them to guide Rogue. Harriet worried that Rogue might not follow their lead. However, the guild leader trusted his instincts and felt confident about the situation. Harriet returned to the present moment and approached Rogue. He attempted to direct Rogue toward a different route, but Rogue had already spotted Chongtap village ahead and wanted to visit it. When they arrived at the village, Rogue became flooded with memories of the child. He remembered when she made him wear a paper bag with 2 holes in it. She then dragged him into a bar, and they requested a table for 2 people. While waiting, they played shooting games. Seeing Rogue's perfect aim, the child was absolutely thrilled. Rogue even sang in the bar, which surprised everyone. Later, dancing filled the establishment, and Rogue and the child enjoyed beer together. It remained one of the rare moments when Rogue felt genuine happiness. Now Rogue entered that same bar once again. The shooting board remained hanging in its place. The bar appeared unchanged, yet stood completely empty. Rogue felt overwhelming sadness. Then the shopkeeper placed a glass of beer before him. He looked up and recognized the same shopkeeper. She explained that the bar had closed many years ago and that Rogue had arrived too late, merely chasing old memories. She recognized him despite his missing bread pouch disguise. Rogue appeared puzzled by how she knew him. She revealed that she had heard countless stories about Rogue from the child who once worked there, although she never knew he was an undead who could speak. The child had worked at the bar to earn money for survival. The shopkeeper poured wine and identified it as Dione, meaning new. She told Rogue that the child had entrusted her with this wine, hoping that Rogue would drink it before embarking on a journey. Adventurers had established this as a tradition for good fortune before departure. But now, no adventurers visited the village, and this wine had remained unsold for years. The shopkeeper spoke again, mentioning that the country was already destroyed. She understood why Rogue had returned, yet she believed what Rogue was attempting now was incorrect. Perhaps Rogue could eventually save the Empire's people, but she doubted this reflected the child's true wishes. Seeing Rogue remain silent, the shopkeeper answered for him. No, that was not what the child would have desired. The child would have wanted something more beautiful and uplifting. She handed Rogue the child's possessions, the dress she wore when becoming a hero, her pendant, and the sword Rogue had given her. Seeing them, Rogue was shocked. The shopkeeper explained that the child had left these items with her and requested that she pass them to Rogue. She reminded Rogue of what the child had truly wanted: gathering companions, saving people, and defeating evil. The child had dreamed of an adventure similar to those in ancient fairy tales. Rogue held his drink and reflected on the word adventure. He drank deeply and began thinking profoundly. Anger blinds people's eyes, and even intelligent individuals can lose their direction. Had anger caused him to repeat the same mistakes? While considering the child, Rogue acknowledged that although others called him her teacher, he had truly learned everything from her. He resolved now to carry her spirit within him forever. After finishing his drink, Rogue thanked the shopkeeper. She smiled and asked about his destination. Rogue explained that having drunk the wine symbolizing new beginnings, it was time to depart. This time, not driven by hatred, but by the adventure the child had envisioned, he left the bar carrying her memory. In his mind, he pictured himself and the child smiling together once more. He felt prepared to begin anew. As Rogue exited the bar, Harriet observed him and spoke to Muron. Muron asked whether Rogue had finished his conversation. Rogue emerged and teased them, calling them inadequate fighters. Muron sensed something had shifted within Rogue. Harriet felt concerned, yet recalled what the guild leader had said about Rogue's excellent understanding of people. Rogue proceeded ahead, and Harriet called out for him to wait. They followed as Harriet explained the adventure ranking system. There existed 10 levels, with Diamond at the highest and Earth at the lowest. These ranks were grouped into 4 categories: superhuman, upper, middle, and lower. Adventurers could not accept work exceeding their rank, and higher ranks commanded greater fees. Most people never surpassed the 7th rank. Topaz and above were designated as superhuman. From the 8th rank upward, adventurers either explored undiscovered territories independently, held back monster waves at battle fronts, or served as military generals. As Harriet spoke, a goblin emerged from the forest. He dispatched it rapidly, noting that such creatures belonged to lower ranks. Subsequently, a massive monster appeared, which he also defeated, explaining it represented middle rank. The three monsters they had previously faced were higher rank. Harriet asked if Rogue was paying attention. Rogue confirmed and inquired about their ranks. Both stated they were 5th rank Topaz. Rogue acknowledged this was impressive, though the ranking system had changed since his era. He mentioned he had once been Ruby rank if that designation still existed, referring to himself as an aged warrior. Harriet felt the name Ruby sounded familiar. Muron laughed, claiming Ruby rank existed only in ancient legends. Nevertheless, Muron admitted she had been frightened upon seeing Rogue's undead army, though now she found him rather entertaining. Rogue summoned his undead army with his sword, startling Muron. Harriet grew terrified and pleaded with Rogue to dismiss them. Rogue grinned and joked about it, then commanded the undead to disappear. Muron appeared thrilled, while Harriet trembled. Rogue mocked Harriet, suggesting that for a northerner, he demonstrated little courage. As Rogue spent more time with them, he recognized a familiar sensation, identical to what he had felt with his former companions and the child. Cherished memories returned, warming Rogue once more. Muron then questioned why Rogue intended to head northward. He cautioned that the mountains contained numerous monsters and unusual creatures that regarded humans as subordinates. Even the foothills resembled a monster-filled recreation area. Rogue explained that he possessed promises to fulfill, items to discover, and ancient debts to repay. Years ago, he had attempted to assault the Demon King's fortress from 120 years prior, using his undead forces. However, a bearded man had annihilated his entire army with a singular barrier. Muron appeared bewildered and Harriet questioned whether such a feat was feasible. Rogue clarified it was not a typical barrier. A wizard from the Heroes faction had constructed it specifically to counter undead waves during the Demon King's dominion. The strength had been tremendous. This explained why Rogue acknowledged his solitary weakness. To overthrow the Empire, he required a human military force. Harriet comprehended Rogue's identity. Rogue confirmed he intended to recruit the northern people as allies, but Harriet felt apprehensive about enlisting those fierce northerners. Muron acknowledged that if successful, they would possess the continent's mightiest army. Rogue revealed his original intention had been to assassinate the Emperor, but his apprentice had dissuaded him. Now, instead of vengeance, he aimed to reconstruct the Empire appropriately. Rogue subsequently mentioned that Harriet and Muron were those who had failed the Great Hunt and fled. Young northerners such as themselves should not venture here. Both expressed shock. Rogue assured them he would not be excessively strict since the journey would prove lengthy and encouraged them to challenge themselves. Harriet nervously mentioned there was already excessive hardship ahead. Rogue laughed and teased them about their bravery. Rogue then announced it was time for a game. He summoned his undead army again, and an enormous beast materialized. Rogue positioned himself atop it, proclaiming he would grant them 10 seconds to escape. Harriet panicked and desperately pleaded for mercy and beckoned to Muron for assistance. But Muron had already bolted away, instructing Harriet to endure and reunite later. Rogue commenced his countdown and Harriet sprinted. As soon as Rogue announced time had expired, the monster pursued Harriet. Meanwhile, Rogue chuckled, contemplating the child, the hero, and every individual he had lost. He proclaimed that Harriet and Muron constituted his second batch of unrequested students. He declared they should appreciate him because he was personally instructing them to prevent them from becoming threats to humanity. Harriet and Muron desperately fled for their survival. Their chaotic movement generated an enormous blast and dense fog blanketed the woodland. Distantly, Lady Fry observed this and smiled at her forces. She announced she had located them. Abruptly, an undead monster began pursuing Muron and Harriet, and they fled in panic. The creature struck the terrain adjacent to Harriet, terrifying him greatly. Harriet screamed at Rogue to cease, cautioning that the blow could have proven fatal. Immediately, a figure raced toward the monster. Lady Fry appeared. She vaulted onto the creature and directed her attention toward Rogue, who stood bewildered. Fry assaulted Rogue with her sword, and Rogue parried the strike. Fry saluted Rogue with a smile, bewildering him further. Fry propelled herself upward while attacking, unleashing a devastating sword technique that struck Rogue unexpectedly, instantly obliterating his undead creature. Muron recoiled in terror, and Harriet observed anxiously. Rogue maintained composure as he descended. Rogue demanded her identity and Fry responded with an eerie expression, introducing herself as Fry, one of the Empire's 4 knights. She designated herself as Fry of War, expressing her intention to battle Rogue. Rogue recollected meeting a knight in Chongtap village previously. Subsequently, Fry charged forward, and their blades collided with tremendous force, shattering surrounding trees. Fry executed another forceful ground strike while Rogue absorbed the impact defensively. Fry unleashed continuous rapid assaults. Rogue attempted to evade, yet Frey's kick propelled him backward. Rogue employed his sword to stabilize himself and maintain his footing. He observed Fry with growing astonishment, recognizing she moved unnaturally. Her range and joint flexibility seemed supernatural. Fry advanced again, and Rogue projected a small stone toward her eyes. Fry focused on the stone, creating an opportunity, and Rogue capitalized by striking Frey's face and limbs repeatedly. Fry sustained injuries and retaliated with a forceful sword strike, hurling Rogue backward amid dense smoke. Fry covered her eyes and ridiculed Rogue's inadequate striking power. She claimed Rogue had arrived with merely 2 children and threatened to bury all of them. Rogue recognized Frey's remarkable combat abilities and exceptional reach. However, he identified her diminished eyesight as her vulnerability. Rogue elevated his demonic sword and activated his undead forces. Dead creatures materialized surrounding Fry. Rogue instructed Muron and Harriet to retreat. An enormous explosion erupted, and a colossal dragon-shaped undead monster surfaced with Muron and Harriet astride it. They expressed frustration with Rogue regarding the smoke deployment without prior notice. Harriet demanded information about the smoke's composition. Rogue calmly explained he had combined burning peppers, turtle shell fragments, and supplementary materials, offering to document the formula. Harriet demanded silence. Muron questioned their strategy, warning that if Fry genuinely represented one of the 4 knights, a military force might prove insufficient. Rogue conceded that preventing Frey's advancement might currently be impossible. They required retreat beyond territorial demarcations while generating substantial commotion for their departure. Muron declined to withdraw but verified whether additional knights approached. Soldiers materialized near the undead creature. Fry sprinted forward and demanded to know whether Rogue intended military confrontation. Rogue prepared and initiated a northern-style assault while Fry countered with a circular-style maneuver. Their combined attacks obliterated the undead creatures. Once the smoke dissipated, Fry laughed, describing the engagement as captivating. She appreciated the towering undead creature, unconventional explosive devices, and the skeleton-wielding bizarre combat techniques. She requested additional demonstrations. Rogue brushed dust from his garment and reproached Fry for soiling a gentleman's attire. Fry reciprocated mockery, suggesting he couldn't appreciate his reflection. Rogue insulted Fry as a cowardly fugitive who suffered capture, and Fry insulted Rogue as a pathetic skeletal being possessing merely bones. Fry questioned why Rogue hadn't mobilized additional undead, expressing disappointment and noting the juvenile companions complicated her concentration. Fry advanced and inquired whether eliminating the juveniles might enhance her combat performance. Rogue cautioned Fry against excessive proximity, but Fry boasted she had thoroughly defeated Rogue and wished to obliterate his consciousness. Projectiles suddenly penetrated Frey's body, accompanied by a volley of arrows. Guild reinforcements had appeared and targeted Fry continuously. 2 projectiles lodged into her. But seeing Frey's negligence, Rogue expressed amusement. The guild commander had dispatched numerous reinforcements. Rogue remarked on Frey's name, advising her to honor the northern peaks. Fry let out a short laugh, realizing why Rogue had journeyed to the northernmost settlement. With a cold expression, she shattered the projectiles and began rallying more forces. She understood the situation was merely a display, a calculated deception. She ordered Rogue to make a convincing impression on their opponents and said she looked forward to an extraordinary battle. With a chilling grin, she added that she expected intriguing developments from Mr. Skull. Rogue stared back in confusion, wondering if Fry had lost her mind. Harriet sighed in relief that Mr. Skull was still safe. Muron, meanwhile, looked toward a massive timber structure and asked about the captured locals. Rogue suddenly remembered and gestured casually toward them. He thanked the Northerners for their earlier help and greeted them with good humor. In response, one of the residents shot him in the arm and laughed, joking about using Rogue's head as a drinking cup. Rogue immediately recognized the mischievous locals. Harriet laughed in agreement, and Muron nodded. Rogue shouted for an evacuation. The group bolted as the residents, armed with spears, gave chase and shouted warnings of invaders. Harriet screamed at Rogue, demanding to know why their supposed allies were attacking. Muron reminded him of the deal he had claimed to have made with the locals. Rogue admitted the agreement had been forged a century ago. Muron groaned in disbelief that they had traveled in vain. Rogue pointed out that they were, indeed, facing northern inhabitants, and suggested that using proper names might help them be recognized. Muron refused, arguing that, at the moment, they looked nothing like allies but invaders. Rogue attempted to calm the situation, and urged the inhabitants to cease their attacks, introducing himself as Edward Benrira, a representative of the northern settlement, and requested a meeting with their leader. The villagers eyed him suspiciously, openly doubting that a skeletal being could truly belong among them. But Rogue assured his companions that the misunderstanding would soon be resolved. Moments later, they were all imprisoned. Harriet mocked Rogue, sarcastically praising his communication skills that landed them behind bars. Rogue responded with a sharp knock to his head, briefly knocking him unconscious. Muron then asked if Rogue really had any connection to the settlement. Rogue admitted that he had once lived there, long ago. When Harriet regained consciousness, he claimed that the situation had worsened. The villagers had marched them past Red Lamb, a familiar district Rogue recognized immediately. Rogue asked what the problem was, but Muron reminded him that their mission was to cross the mountains and leave, not become entangled with the settlement itself. Before they could discuss further, a guard appeared and barked that the zombie chieftain had demanded Rogue's presence. They were escorted to the chieftain's hall. The chieftain glared at Rogue with visible contempt, calling him a fraud. He mocked Harriet and Muron for daring to return so shamelessly. Trembling, Harriet tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding, but Rogue interrupted, insisting he truly was one of the northern people. He asked for their release so they could speak properly. The chieftain's anger only deepened. He declared deceit a punishable crime and branded Rogue a liar, while dismissing Harriet and Muron as disgraced northerners. Rogue exhaled slowly and explained that after the failure of the Great Hunt, he had suffered a kind of living detachment, a state of lost identity. Then, without warning, he shattered his restraints and stepped forward. But the chieftain ordered his subordinates to stand down, declaring he would handle the matter personally. Rising with violent intent, he seized his weapon firmly and hurled it at Rogue. Rogue dodged with ease and in the same motion, shattered Muron's restraints. Harriet burst into panic-stricken sobs, while Muron quickly realized Rogue's actions were deliberate. Rogue then commanded a tactical withdrawal. The chieftain pressed his assault with unrelenting precision. Muron watched in awe at Rogue's flawless evasive movements. The chieftain mocked him, questioning whether he could only dodge. Rogue's eyes began to glow faintly as he responded affirmatively. The chieftain scoffed at the display, ridiculing the hollow glow of a skeleton, and struck Rogue's skull with tremendous force, proclaiming that the dead could never stand among the living. Moments later, the chieftain found himself utterly subdued. Rogue repeated the chieftain's own words, declaring that the dead must be shattered, and the living must remember to advance. He then questioned why the chieftain knelt despite still drawing breath. Rogue named him Lamb and suggested they begin a proper negotiation. Within, the chieftain conceded Rogue's overwhelming power. Memories of ancestral training resurfaced, compelling his respect. He bowed his head and asked what Rogue desired. Rogue ordered a full assembly of tribal leaders to prepare for an imperial strike. The chieftain admired the audacious command but promised to arrange the gathering swiftly. Rogue agreed and waited at Harriet's manor, only to express surprise that Harriet even had one. The chieftain looked puzzled by his ignorance and revealed Harriet's true title, Sword Hawker Harriet, successor of the White Lion Tail tribe. The group's journey continued into the northern mountains, within the jurisdiction of Red Lamb, where a large hawker estate stood shrouded in mist. Harriet examined the structure in silence before stepping inside. Rogue watched with a trace of sarcasm, remarking on the odd composure of an exhausted wanderer. Harriet, quiet and withdrawn, admitted that he had abandoned the hawker name when escaping through the mountains. He expressed reluctance to reclaim any connection to his former home and discomfort at returning. Moving toward his private chambers, he instructed the others to summon him if necessary. Rogue noted the change in his demeanor, which Muron acknowledged with a faint smile. The housekeeper, Vanson, appeared and greeted them warmly. Rogue introduced himself, and when Muron gave his name, Vanson's eyes lit with recognition, and he asked how Muron had fared. Muron replied that things had been merely tolerable. Rogue, curious, asked skeptically whether Harriet was truly next in line for chieftainship. Vanson confirmed it. Harriet had once lived there while training as a warrior and preparing for leadership amid territorial strife. After the repeated failure of the Great Hunt, he had disappeared with Muron, and most subordinates had since departed, except Vanson, who had remained. When Rogue asked why he stayed, Vanson replied with quiet warmth that he felt bound to preserve the household and uphold the tribe's faith in Harriet's return. Later, the scene turned to Harriet, lying in quiet reflection within his chambers, while Muron tended the gardens outside. Rogue approached, asking what she was doing. Muron greeted him lightly, addressing him as Mr. Skull, and explained that she was cultivating temporary blooms, a tribute to her family's horticultural heritage. She spoke of Harriet's potential as an exceptional chieftain, but that was not why they departed. She chose to tell Rogue a story from long ago. Muron's father Pusame, came before the White Lion tribe's chief, Ryman, and his son, Harriet. He greeted them with respect and introduced himself as a gardener, presenting his daughter, Muron. Ryman welcomed them warmly, saying the mountains had guided them there. He promised they would be treated kindly for the rest of their lives and invited them to join the tribe. Pu Same accepted with quiet simplicity. Young Muron, however, quickly grew restless. To ease the moment, Ryman told Harriet that Muron was about his age and asked him to show her around. Harriet agreed, a little nervous, and introduced himself. Muron offered him something that looked like a piece of pink candy. Harriet laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a gift, and thanked her, until he realized it was goat droppings. He shouted in disgust and hurled it away. Muron burst into laughter and properly introduced herself. Flustered, Harriet warned her that such behavior could get her in trouble, reminding her that his rank was higher. Muron tilted her head and asked whether rank was really more important than having fun. After a moment's thought, Harriet admitted it wasn't. Muron grinned, called him silly for standing still, and pulled him along. As they walked, Muron began playing with a pig, tapping it until its head swelled comically, round like a potato. From the bushes, a few other children peeked out to watch. Muron waved them over, inviting them to join. Soon, laughter filled the clearing as everyone played together. Watching her, Harriet realized how different Muron was. She didn't flatter him, didn't seek his favor, and didn't treat him like the chief's son, just like another child. It was the first time anyone had ever seen him that way. Years later, Harriet and Muron lay together in a quiet field. Harriet called out to her, and Muron replied by calling him an idiot. He laughed softly, but his smile faded as he wondered aloud if he could ever become like his mother. Muron could tell he was worried, not just about himself but about what it meant to be chief. Harriet confessed that he would soon have to leave for Red Lamb to begin his training, and the thought scared him. Muron smiled gently and told him not to worry. She said that she and everyone in the White Lion tribe believed in him. When the time finally came for Harriet to leave, he stood before Red Bidan, the chief of the Red Lamb tribe. Bidan greeted him warmly, saying his name with pride. "I'll be your teacher," he told Harriet. "I'll teach you everything you need to know to lead your people well." Training began immediately. Red Bidan sat atop a massive stone while Harriet strained to drag it across the ground, every muscle trembling from the effort. "If a chief loses a fight," Bidan said, "he loses his voice and his people. Stamina is what keeps a nation strong. Your strength will become your tribe's strength." Later, they sat before a large board game. Bidan's tone shifted, stern but patient. "Now use your head. Think carefully. Watch your opponent. One careless move, and your people could pay the price." He then led Harriet to a vast room filled with books, rows upon rows of them. "There are 2,250 volumes here," Bidan said. "They contain our laws, our history, the lore of monsters, and much more. Learn them all." Harriet spent countless hours studying, until his nose bled from exhaustion. He often wondered if he could truly do it, if he had what it took. But whenever doubt crept in, he thought of Muron's smile, and pushed himself to keep going, whispering to himself to stay strong. Nearly a year passed since his training began. Then, one day, news spread swiftly through the tribes. Harriet had run away.